Hi everybody, I'm Damien Osborne and I'm an artist from Cape Town in South Africa, and today this is just going to be a bit of a wrap-up video for this figure painting and for the series. So as you can see, I've got a lot of work yet still to do. I need to build up the contrast and do a lot of glazing and stumbling and things like that. So if you do like my content and you like this kind of stuff, please subscribe and hit the notification button. And if you haven't watched the previous videos leading up to this point, please go back and check them out. It might help you. Leave any comments that you like. That would really be appreciated. So, okay, thanks. Today I'm going to do some glazing with gold ochre, permanent rose and burnt umber. So many artists talk about glazing with oil paints, but what is glazing exactly? Here's a bit of a close-up as I'm working on the arm. Just using a large soft brush to blend that beautiful gold ochre in. It's really starting to warm up the temperature of the body. You can see how transparent it is. There's a bit of permanent rose and burnt umber, working around the core shadow of the form and blending in with the gold ochre. I really love these colors. Great for painting the flesh. So I've talked about glazing before in many of my other blogs and videos, but glazing is basically applying a thin transparent film of oil paint in successive layers. And here you can see my palette where I've blended the colors together nicely. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, but I did the first stage of glazing using gold ochre and permanent rose and a little bit of burnt umber. I basically just warmed up the very cold skin tone, and I need to give it a lot of drying in between because I used quite a lot of oil. So now I'm going to work on the hair and see how far I get. Maybe I'll do the sky as well. So yeah, check it out. I'm trying to create a lovely warm color for her dark hair, and in glazing it's better to start with a lighter color and then work up to the darker colors so that the light travels through and it builds up a depth of color. And again, I'm applying the same color to the sky to warm up the shadows and create unity in the painting. So glazing or using an indirect painting method, as in building up many layers, is different to direct painting, where the painting is done with one sitting or wet and wet. That's also called a la prima. But I usually prefer painting in layers, or the indirect painting method, because it's much easier to control the subtle color and value shifts across the form of the human body. When I'm finished for the day, I write in my little book a bit of a plan as to how I'm going to proceed with the painting. You can see how I do it stage by stage. Normally between the layers, I give it a few weeks to dry, so after a few weeks I've kind of forgotten about where I was at. And this notebook helps me to pick up from where I left off. So this painting was fairly challenging because most of the sitter's body is not in direct light, and therefore the shifts in value within the shadow side of a body are very subtle. So areas like her left shoulder, her left leg, her right knee, and top of her right foot are in more direct light, which is coming from the sky. The figure in essence is actually rim shot with light. So glazing takes a bit of practice and also a bit of patience, and it's quite simple once you get the hang of it. It takes patience and planning because you need to give it plenty of time to dry in between. And here I'm interrupted. So you need to give it plenty of time to dry in between, which is why most people prefer the direct painting or alla prima method. So when it comes to choosing colors for glazing, I normally choose according to my needs, as I have a very intuitive grasp of color mixing due to my experience. But I have written a blog below, and it talks about differences in transparency of pigments, etc. So the secret to glazing is to make sure that you have the right amount of oil and pigment. Too little oil and the pigment will be a bit too dry and it won't really be transparent, and too much oil and it will create beading. So I always make sure that I have a rag with me to wipe off any excess oil or pigment, and to make sure that it's not too dark or oily. I'm also continuously using a rag to wipe my brushes. And then you can see by adding a little bit more shadow, the lighter areas pop out a bit more as well. Here's another layer for the hair, making it a bit darker, and I use a rag to pull out some of the lighter areas. Her curly hair is rather windswept, and there's a lot of dramatic weather happening in the sky. So with glazing, I generally find it easier to use one or two, or a max of 3 pigments at a time. It helps me to control the color mixing and the values more easily. Okay, so now I'm adding some whites to the sky, thinking about the rhythms of the composition. The light's coming from behind the clouds, so they are edged with white. And I'm trying to create a lot of movement in the sky. It's quite tricky painting the hair blending with the clouds, so I'm using very soft edges. I stand back a lot to make sure that everything's looking good and I get an overall view of the whole painting. I'm using titanium white here because it's a lot more opaque than flake white. And I'm using long-handled brushes to paint from a distance and get greater movement in my strokes. You can see now how I'm creating many different layers in the clouds. I really like to paint dramatic skies. I think it really adds drama to the painting. It's quite why I like Beethoven. Adding details to the hair and the curls matching the patterns in the sky. I also wanted to get a feeling of saltiness in her hair. And here I'm adding some Payne's Grey and ultramarine and a little bit of burnt umber just to get a lovely dark color. And now I'm accentuating some of the shadow shapes and the form. Here I'm using a bit of burnt sienna and umber. So I do paint a lot with earth colors, particularly for painting the skin, and these are all transparent colors, so they're beautiful for glazing. Working on the creases of the skin, that's the darkest areas and the warmest areas. And some of the core shadows. And now that the painting's been dry for a few weeks, I can start working on the cast shadows. And there's a shadow that's been cast by her head over her back, and obviously on the sand as well. Being very careful here not to lose the form. I want to maintain that scapular. Just going over the creases again. The trick with glazing is sometimes you have to be able to judge what the painting will look like when it dries. So sometimes when it's wet it looks darker, but then as the oil dries it obviously lightens a bit and then you have to go over it again. But if you go over it too thickly it won't produce a lovely glaze, and it's generally better for the health of the painting, well the structure of the painting, to use thinner layers, thin oily layers, rather than big fat gloopy oily layers which can cause wrinkling and adhesion problems later on. Just working on the details here now, stepping back a lot, making sure that I'm not over painting. So I want to work on some of my edges but keep most of them softer. kind of cast shadow over the sand. This is the most interesting part of the painting, where I have to step back very often just to make sure that I'm not overworking and that I'm nearing the finish, and trying to find any mistakes and places that I've missed out. I keep going back to the same spot because I feel like I've overworked that one shadow, the crease in her leg. Okay, so that concludes the figure painting series. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and if you send me any comments, I always reply to them, so please go ahead, ask me any questions. So now I just like to wait a few weeks before declaring the painting really finished. Sometimes you see things in a painting later on that you don't see at first. I was talking about this painting here before, which I think I've kind of given up on now a little bit. I wasn't working from a reference or anything else, working from memory basically. So I don't know if it really looks like this person, but okay, whatever. I think I learned something from it. And then this painting here I was talking about in the last video as well, which I completed, and I'm quite proud of this one, especially since I didn't really use a reference or a model. Yeah. And now we are going to be moving home. The next few weeks are going to be quite hectic. I already got a lot of boxes packed here, so I'm going to be building a new studio, and it's going to be quite crazy. So I don't know when my next video will be out. I've actually decided to do a kind of 90-day meditation thing, because being an artist sometimes can be, sounds funny, but lots going on in your brain, and sometimes you just need to really focus and calm down and cut out all the distractions. So I'm also just getting away from social media, and yeah, see how it impacts my life and impacts my art. Oh, I wanted to talk about the dynamic symmetry that I used. It's a new concept that's, well, it's new to me, but basically it's just creating diagonals for your composition, creating diagonals from points to points, and then like a star-like pattern. And yeah, so you can see here. So please subscribe, and please check out my website. This is the last painting of my Siren series, at least for now I think, and you can check out the link below, where I've done a whole lot of figure paintings in this series. Okay, cool, thanks.